Just moments before a private royal audit, Princess Anne descends into a forgotten room beneath Windsor Castle, and what she finds triggers the most devastating royal crisis since Diana's death. The silence in the castle was different that morning, not just quite heavy. As the audit team assembled discreetly in the drawing room, Princess Anne received a confidential tip from the Queen's former legal secretary. There was something off. A strange entry logged in the estate index, a discrepancy between the official record and what had long been presumed sealed in stone. Queen Elizabeth's will. Anne, always the stoic defender of royal integrity, didn't hesitate. She slipped away without announcement, descending through a passageway that hadn't seen sunlight since before her mother's coronation. Beneath the grandeur of Windsor Castle, beyond stone and shadow, lay a forgotten archive chamber. And inside that room, sealed behind a rusted iron gate, was a storm waiting to be unleashed. The air was thick with age. Dust clung to the ancient files stacked haphazardly across carved oak shelves. Anne moved slowly, methodically. Her eyes scanned labels with practiced ease until she landed on it, Royal Testament, 2022. The folder looked too new. Inside, she found not one, but two wills. One bore the Queen's signature in fading ink, dated months before her death. The other, tucked carefully into a newer sleeve, was freshly inked, handwritten, and alarmingly recent. Anne's heart pounded as she compared the two. The signatures were almost identical, but the weight of the pen, the curves, the pressure on the parchment, something felt wrong. Then came the names. Catherine, William, and even Harry were there, but buried beneath them, over and over again, was Camilla. Mentioned not once or twice, but repeatedly. Estates, heirlooms, ceremonial rites. It was as if the crown had been tilted deliberately in her favor. Anne's hands trembled, not out of fear but fury. She knew her mother, Queen Elizabeth, was precise, intentional, and above all, protective of the monarchy's balance. This revision wasn't her voice. It was someone else's ink attempting to rewrite history. Anne straightened, eyes narrowing. This couldn't wait. She had to alert Charles, had to warn William, and had to ensure this deceit never saw the light of day. But just as she turned to leave the vault, a soft shuffling stopped her cold. Behind her, in the dim corridor, stood a silhouette. And when the light finally caught her face, it confirmed Anne's worst fear. Camilla was already in the room holding a pen. But before Anne can sound the alarm, she's faced with a chilling discovery. Camilla herself is already in the room, holding a pen. Two powerful women, one ancient will. As Anne locks eyes with Camilla in the vault, the silence is more dangerous than a scream. The stillness between them was razor-sharp. Anne didn't flinch, but her eyes bore into Camilla with a force that made the air feel electric. Camilla, surprisingly composed, offered only a slight gasp, feigning surprise, but there was no shame in her posture, no guilt in her voice. Instead, she reached for diplomacy, her tone calm and deliberate. "I was ensuring that everything was in order before the auditors arrived," she said, a carefully rehearsed smile tugging at her lips. "You know how these things can be misinterpreted." But Anne wasn't here for charades. Her voice, laced with fury, restrained by royal discipline, cut through the room like a blade. "Misinterpreted? You're holding a fountain pen over my mother's will. That's not misinterpretation, that's tampering." Camilla took a step back, choosing her words with surgical precision. "I was safeguarding her final wishes. There were adjustments, private ones, she intended but hadn't formalized." The confidence in her explanation was unsettling. Anne wasn't buying it, not for a second. Her eyes shifted downward, locking onto the pages Camilla had been adjusting. That's when she saw it. One of the signature lines bore ink that hadn't even dried completely. The unmistakable sheen of something freshly written. It was a signature, all right, Elizabeth R., but too perfect, too recent. Anne's heart raced. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was confirmation. Something unholy had been done to the Queen's legacy, and the perpetrator was standing right in front of her, as if it were her right. Then came an unexpected interruption. A royal security officer, clearly alerted by movement or noise, appeared at the entrance. Anne turned, expecting protocol to kick in, but before she could speak, Camilla raised a hand. "It's all right," she said softly. "We're fine here." The officer hesitated, then nodded and disappeared back into the corridor. Anne's blood ran cold. Since when did security take Camilla's word over a senior royal like herself? And why did Camilla look so composed, so certain she could contain this? The air thickened with the weight of unspoken questions. Anne, never one to bluff, stepped forward and declared, "I'm contacting Charles. He deserves to know what's happening before this goes any further." For the first time, Camilla's veneer cracked. Panic flared in her eyes. "Please," she said, almost whispering, "don't tell him. Not yet." That plea was all Anne needed to hear. Not yet? There was no yet in matters like this. The Queen's will had been altered, and Camilla had just confirmed she didn't want the king to know. But Anne had no intention of shielding Charles. Because the truth was, she had someone far more unyielding in mind. Someone who had loved his grandmother fiercely. Someone who had everything to lose if the truth stayed buried. Someone Camilla had always underestimated. But it's not the king Anne turns to, it's the one person Camilla never expected to be brought into this. William. When Prince William is shown what Camilla tried to bury, his entire demeanor shifts and he makes a promise no one can unhear. This will never stand. The room was quiet, but William's hands were clenched, trembling not with fear, but rage barely held in check. Anne laid the two wills in front of him, side by side. One brittle with age, the other alarmingly pristine. William didn't need to be told which was real and which had been tampered with. He had heard his grandmother's voice just weeks before her passing. Her mind had been sharp, her values are clear, and most importantly, her intentions were unmistakable. She had spoken candidly about her legacy, about Catherine, about the importance of continuity and truth. Never once had she mentioned changing a single clause in her will, and certainly not to favor someone whose loyalty had always carried conditions. His fingers traced the ink on the second document. It was almost insulting. The signature was forged with confidence but lacked the weight of the Queen's hand. And there, over and over, Camilla's name appeared. Land grants, royal heirlooms, ceremonial privileges, all conveniently altered. William didn't hesitate. His voice dropped, trembling with fury as he turned to Anne. "She's rewriting history," he said, with ink and greed. Then louder, as if the walls themselves needed to hear it, "This will never stand." Camilla entered the room then, her timing anything but accidental. Her face was a calculated mix of concern and indignation. "You're overreacting," she snapped. "It's a misunderstanding. You're being hysterical." But her words did nothing to pacify him. If anything, they lit the match. William stood, eyes ablaze. "You think this is hysteria? You forged my grandmother's dying wishes. You've crossed a line no one ever dared to approach." Anne stepped between them, her voice firm but measured. She knew the temperature was rising too fast. "We need to stay composed," she warned him. "This isn't the place. Not yet." But William was already past the point of return. His fury wasn't just about the will. It was about everything. The whispered schemes, the favoritism, the quiet dismantling of the Queen's legacy while the nation mourned in good faith. "If you think this can be buried, you're wrong," he said to Camilla. "Scotland Yard should be involved. This is fraud. Plain and simple." Anne hesitated. Involving the authorities would bring scandal on a scale the monarchy hadn't seen in decades. It could shatter public trust, destabilize everything they were trying to preserve. "Let's find Charles first," she said quietly. "He deserves to know before the crown becomes a courtroom." William didn't respond. He stormed out without another word, the fury in his steps louder than any reply. But the palace corridors offered no answers. When they finally located King Charles, he was somewhere they least expected, and he wasn't alone. But King Charles isn't where they expect him to be, and when they find him, he's not alone. Behind the palace doors, King Charles clutches a sealed envelope with the Queen's handwriting. And he's not ready to let anyone read it, not even Anne. The air in the king's private study was unusually thick, not with incense or protocol, but with tension no crown could suppress. Charles sat beside one of the Queen's most trusted legal advisors, an elderly figure known for discretion and loyalty to the late monarch. In his hand was a weathered envelope, yellowed just slightly at the edges, marked with a chillingly specific phrase, "To be opened only by my successor." That successor now stared at the letter like it was a ticking bomb. William and Anne had found him just minutes earlier, after tearing through the castle searching for answers. But it was clear Charles already knew more than he'd let on. Anne was done playing diplomat. Her voice cut through the heavy silence. "You've had that letter since the funeral. Why hasn't it been opened?" Charles didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the envelope, as if he were bargaining with time. Mother didn't want it read unless... He stopped. The pause was telling. Anne stepped closer, her words slow, deliberate. Unless what, Charles? Unless someone exposed the truth you already suspected? Camilla, who had silently followed the confrontation into the room, finally spoke. You don't understand, she said, but her voice lacked the steel it once had. William turned sharply. No, you don't understand, he snapped. We've seen the will, and we know what you did. Camilla tried to defend herself, but this time, William didn't let her finish. Enough, he said with quiet finality. This isn't your legacy. This isn't your moment. His eyes returned to his father. Read it. Charles, cornered not by force but by truth, finally nodded. With shaking hands he broke the seal, his breath uneven. The room held its breath with him. Inside was more than just instruction. It was confession, foresight, and finality. Queen Elizabeth wrote of balance, of duty, of the sacred trust that must never be tampered with. She named Catherine as the symbolic heir to her private estate, specifically listing heirlooms passed from Queen Victoria's line, royal diaries, and tokens meant only for the future queen consort. Camilla's name was noticeably and intentionally absent. What the queen had signed was not a slight. It was a choice, one made with careful thought, grounded in tradition, not sentiment. And now, laid bare, it sent ripples through the room. Anne stood tall, her suspicions vindicated. William's jaw tightened as he read and reread the words that echoed his grandmother's quiet conversations in her final days. Charles said nothing at first. His silence was no longer defensive, it was broken. He had known deep down. He had felt the tension between loyalty to his wife and fidelity to his mother's final wishes. And in protecting one, he had nearly betrayed the other. But before anyone could fully absorb the weight of the Queen's revelations, the legal advisor cleared his throat. There's another one, he said softly, pulling a second sealed envelope from a hidden drawer smaller, but marked just as deliberately, to be opened in case of conflict. And just when the room begins to absorb the Queen's intent, a second sealed envelope is found, and it changes everything. Buried in a ceremonial chest beneath Queen Elizabeth's favorite portrait lies the will no one was supposed to find. But Anne does, and what it reveals sets the monarchy ablaze. The letter had shifted everything, but it still wasn't enough not for Anne. Something still lingered, a shadow that refused to lift even after the Queen's handwritten words were laid bare. As the room tried to process the shock of Catherine being chosen over Camilla, Anne's mind raced back to a moment few would remember: an afternoon walk with her mother, when the Queen, uncharacteristically candid, had said with a knowing smile, "You can never fully trust the vault. Some truths need better hiding places." At the time, it had seemed like a cryptic joke. Now it felt like a warning. Hours later, Anne returned to the Queen's private study, alone. There was no map, no clue, only instinct and memory. Her eyes drifted to the grand portrait above the fireplace, the Queen captured in regal stillness. That was it. Anne opened the base panel of the wooden chest beneath it, long considered ceremonial, more furniture than function. But within seconds, she heard the metallic click of a lock giving way. Inside, wrapped in a velvet cloth and marked simply with the royal cipher, lay a folder. When she opened it, her breath caught. The real will. This was not a duplicate. It was the Queen's final directive, dated and signed only weeks before her passing, and it was damning. Unlike the edited version Camilla had tried to circulate, this one bore no ambiguity. Catherine was named as the sole heir to Elizabeth's personal jewels, including those historically tied to Camilla's family through Charles's second marriage. Even more devastating was a legal clause that had been entirely omitted from the fraudulent version. Camilla was to remain queen consort in title only. No financial authority, no symbolic control over the royal estate. It was a deliberate limitation of Elizabeth's final firewall against manipulation. Anne brought the document to the Royal Council without hesitation. This time there would be no delays. Handwriting experts, summoned under emergency protocol, confirmed the signature's authenticity on the spot. The parchment, the ink, the tone, every detail aligned with the Queen's final style. No one in that room, not even Charles, could deny it. William's face was unreadable, but his silence screamed louder than any protest. Camilla didn't speak. She didn't need to. The room had already spoken for her. What enraged the others most wasn't just the forgery, it was the intent. The version Camilla had brandished was a fabrication that rewrote Elizabeth's legacy in her favor. It removed the Queen's symbolic safeguards, redrew inheritance lines, and twisted titles into power grabs. The monarchy wasn't just bruised, it had nearly been hijacked from within. The real will was now public, undeniable, and devastating. And as it swept through the inner sanctums of power, Camilla quietly disappeared from the chamber, not with dignity, not with defiance, but with a knowing retreat. Yet what she did next, away from the prying eyes of the court, would ignite the most scandalous storm Buckingham Palace had seen in decades. The true will is undeniable now, but the damage has been done. Camilla retreats, and what she does next shakes the entire nation. In a move of sheer panic, Camilla releases her own version of the Queen's will to the press, sparking a firestorm of outrage and disbelief. It began as a whisper, a murmur through the halls of British media offices, and then, all at once, it exploded. Major tabloids across the country published what they claimed was the authentic last will of Queen Elizabeth II, provided exclusively by a source close to the crown. But those who knew better didn't need to dig deep to uncover the truth. It was Camilla's version of the same altered document Anne had caught her with in the Windsor archives. And now, it was plastered on every front page, framing Camilla not as the accused, but as the Queen's chosen successor in influence and wealth. The move was calculated, it was desperate, and it was disastrous. The palace's press office was blindsided. No statement had been cleared, no release scheduled. Internally, chaos erupted. Phone lines rang off the hook. Legal teams were called into emergency meetings. Charles's advisors scrambled to piece together a response. But it was too late. The damage had been done, not just inside the monarchy but in the court of public opinion. Within hours, side-by-side comparisons of the forged and authentic wills flooded social media. Signature analysts, royal commentators, and legal experts tore Camilla's version apart. The inconsistencies were glaring. The handwriting is too clean. The dates are too convenient. The language is utterly uncharacteristic of the Queen's formal tone. Across Britain, fury ignited like dry grass under a match. Editorials called it treasonous. Protesters began gathering outside royal residences, demanding transparency. One prominent barrister called it the most scandalous act of royal forgery in modern British history. Another said bluntly, this wasn't just a mistake. This was an attempted rewrite of royal destiny. And in the heart of Buckingham Palace, King Charles was finally forced to confront what he could no longer deny. Camilla was summoned without ceremony. The doors were closed. What passed between them was never officially recorded, but insiders revealed the king was visibly shaken, his composure shattered. He admitted reluctantly that he had suspected something was off for months, that certain remarks, certain documents Camilla had referenced, hadn't aligned with what he remembered his mother saying in her final months. But he had chosen silence. He had chosen peace. And now, that silence had grown teeth and turned on him. Outside the palace, another message rippled across the monarchy, but this one came not with words, but with symbols. Catherine, in her first public appearance since the leak, stepped out quietly, wearing one of Queen Elizabeth's most beloved brooches. It was a piece known to be kept in the late monarch's personal collection, now confirmed, by the real will, to belong to Catherine alone. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The brooch said everything. It was a silent rebuke, a claim of legitimacy, and a message to the world. The Queen had made her choice. The fallout was nuclear. Camilla was no longer seen as a misunderstood figure navigating royal waters. She was now the orchestrator of a scandal that threatened to destabilize the very image of the crown. But before the dust could fully settle, a new twist emerged. One so volatile, so unexpected, it could tip the balance once and for all. But just as public sentiment turns against Camilla, a hidden recording emerges, one that could either clear her name or destroy it forever. Late one night, Princess Anne listens to a secret recording from Queen Elizabeth herself, left behind in the castle archives. What the Queen says will haunt the monarchy forever. It was never meant to surface. Locked away in the depths of Windsor's private archive, wedged between handwritten journals and official correspondence, lay a box marked only with the Queen's personal cipher. It wasn't part of the public estate or the legal documents reviewed during probate. This was personal. Tucked inside was a cassette, aged, fragile, and labeled in her unmistakable hand. Private to be opened if questions arise. No date, no context, just a warning embedded in ink. Anne sat alone in the late hours, heart heavy with the weight of what she feared it would contain. She pressed play, and within seconds, her mother's voice, clear, deliberate, and more intimate than any formal address, began to echo through the room. "I've watched it unfold quietly," the Queen said, "and I've said little, because I believed those closest to me would understand what silence often means. But I must speak now, if only for the sake of what's to come." The voice didn't waver. It was the voice of a monarch and a mother firm, reflective, deeply human. What followed was nothing short of a confession. Elizabeth expressed concern, veiled in sorrow, about the shifting dynamics inside the palace. She mentioned Camilla directly, not with malice, but with worry. "Her influence grows beyond what I imagined, and while I accept the life Charles has chosen, I cannot allow sentiment to overwrite structure." Then, a pause. A long, thoughtful silence before the Queen dropped the name that changed everything. "I made a promise," she said quietly, "to Diana. Long before the world knew how deeply she'd suffer. I swore to her that the future of this crown would rest with a woman who embodied both duty and grace. And that woman is Catherine." The air thickened as the Queen continued, her voice now heavy with certainty. "If there is confusion after my passing, if any version of my will surfaces that favors others beyond what is right, know this: it is not my voice, and it is not my legacy." Her final words struck with undeniable clarity. "Those who seek to rewrite my will in their favor do not serve the monarchy, they serve themselves. Do not let them prevail." Anne froze. The Queen wasn't just casting doubt, she was exposing a motive, and in doing so, she validated everything Anne had feared, everything she had uncovered. The forged will, the calculated edits, the relentless ambition dressed as devotion. The tape ended not with a conclusion, but a final breath, deep, deliberate, final. There was no need for a signature or seal. The voice was unmistakably Elizabeth's. No court would deny it. No family member could ignore it. And for Anne, it was more than just evidence. It was her mother's final call for protection. Not of property, not of jewels, but of truth. Anne knows this is more than evidence, it's the Queen's last plea. And the final confrontation is now inevitable. With evidence in one hand and the Queen's voice in the other, William faces his father in a private chamber and issues the ultimatum no one saw coming. The door shut behind them with a finality that echoed through Buckingham Palace. No aides, no advisors. Just a son confronting a king, not as heir to the throne, but as a man defending the very soul of the monarchy. William stood before his father with the cassette in his hand, the weight of it more powerful than any crown. He didn't waste time. He pressed play. Queen Elizabeth's voice, calm yet haunting, spilled into the air like a ghost refusing to be silenced. Her warnings about Camilla, her solemn promise to Diana, her declaration that Catherine was the rightful bearer of the monarchy's moral legacy, and most damning of all, her final plea to protect her will from corruption. Charles didn't move at first. He sat frozen, his face a map of heartbreak and disbelief. As the words poured out, his eyes welled not just from shock, but from guilt. He had heard his mother speak those truths in pieces during her final days, but he hadn't understood their urgency. Or worse, he had chosen not to. And now, that silence has turned into complicity. When the recording stopped, there was nothing left to interpret. No gray area, only right and wrong. Anne, who had entered quietly midway through, didn't offer comfort. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke louder than anything. But then she did speak just once. The monarchy doesn't need perfection, but it cannot survive betrayal. William stepped forward, his voice sharp, steady. "If you don't act now, I will. I'll release the recording. I'll release the original will. The world deserves to know what the Queen truly intended." Charles looked up, his expression hollow. "And what will that do to your stepmother?" William didn't hesitate. "It's not about her anymore. It's about her." He nodded toward the speaker, still humming with static from the tape. "It's about the promise you watched her make and let someone else erase." The ultimatum hung between them like a blade. Charles didn't argue. He didn't plead. He simply nodded, slow and heavy, knowing there was no path forward that didn't begin with surrender. By morning, the official announcement was released. Queen Elizabeth's final will had been authenticated and would now stand as the Crown's guiding document. In the same breath, the palace confirmed that Queen Camilla would retain her ceremonial title but would no longer hold any formal decision-making role within the institution. No council influence, no estate control. Her power had been hollowed out, leaving only the name. The public responded with cautious relief. Royalists saw it as a return to order. Critics saw it as long overdue accountability. But inside the family, the silence that followed was louder than any declaration. Camilla didn't protest publicly. She vanished from the inner circle as swiftly as she had once climbed into it. But even with justice seemingly served, the Queen's final wish isn't fully honored until the last box is opened. Just as the dust begins to settle, a final box from Balmoral arrives at Buckingham Palace inside, the Queen's most personal keepsake, and a message meant only for Anne. It arrived without ceremony, wrapped in neutral cloth, unmarked by official seals. The handwriting was familiar, elegant, deliberate, unmistakably Elizabeth's, addressed solely to Anne. The box, sent from Balmoral's private wing, had been left in the care of a trusted estate housekeeper, with strict instructions not to be delivered until all other matters concerning the Queen's estate were resolved. And now, with Camilla quietly removed from influence and the rightful will restored, the moment had come. Anne opened it with trembling hands, not out of fear, but reverence. Inside was a diary, its spine cracked with time, open to a single date, August 31, 1997, the day Diana died. The entry was brief but piercing. Elizabeth had written of the thunderous silence that followed the news, of the helplessness she felt not as sovereign, but as a mother and grandmother. "We failed her," the Queen wrote, "not with words, but with the things left unsaid. I will not forget her legacy." Beneath it lay a smaller envelope, sealed in wax, marked with Anne's name. The letter inside was raw, intimate, and written with the weight of a woman who had ruled a nation but never stopped being a sister and a mother. "Anne," it read, "you always saw through the noise. You never bowed to pressure or popularity. You held the line when others forgot where it was drawn. Thank you for protecting the crown from within, quietly, fiercely, and without reward." At the bottom of the box, wrapped in deep blue velvet, was a locket. Inside, two miniatures, one of Diana, radiant in her youth, and one of Elizabeth, captured in her final portrait. Opposite ends of history, yet now bound together in silver. It wasn't just a keepsake. It was a torch passed without announcement. A silent handover of moral guardianship, not to a queen or heir, but to the one who had safeguarded it all from the shadows. Meanwhile, Camilla left the palace through the private East Gate. No press conference, no statement, no farewell waves to photographers. Just the quiet closing of a door that would not reopen. Her departure was not dramatic, but it was absolute. The corridors she once navigated with influence now stood still behind her. And the nation, watching not through anger but reflection, did not weep for her loss of status. They wept for the institution that had come so close to losing its soul. As the gates close behind Camilla, a new chapter begins. One where the Queen's true will lives on, not in law books, but in the hearts of those she trusted most. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.